What I really need from my law firm is someone who can provide my staff training so we actually can stay out of trouble.
I really just want somebody who's going to aggressively fight for me in court. Is that too much to ask?
When you have property management problems, we have your solutions. This is the Zona Law Group podcast with the experienced attorneys from Zona Law.
Welcome back to the Zona Law podcast. I am Mark Zinman, joined here today.
Chris Welch.
It's good to see you, Chris. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Mark.
Good. So we got some big news coming out of Tucson, which is why we come to Chris. So what's what's coming out of Tucson here?
Well, we just had some news come out that Tucson has passed that source of income is now considered a protected class. So there's going to be some changes coming down the pipe that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, and that's right away. And so what we want to do here today is kind of jump in really and give you right off the bat what's critical, what you need to know, policies change, things like that, and then we'll step back again and kind of go through the analysis. So we're talking about source of income. To be entirely clear, source of income as a protected class does not refer to strippers. It does not refer to drug dealers. That is not a priority of our government. What does source of income refer to?
So source of income generally refers to salaries, your wages. It could also be child support payments, other government assistance that you could receive. And in fact, in the definition, it also includes rental assistance. So that's something we need to be aware of.
Yeah, and of course, so the most common thing where people think of source of income and why the government would be involved would be Section 8 and rental subsidies. And so now in Tucson, properties must start accepting Section 8 residents. That is the only city in the entire state that requires that right now. And I know there's going to be challenges to this rule as well. But for now, Tucson has to be aware of that. So there's really three things that we have to be, people in Tucson, operating properties in Tucson have to be aware of, which is, number one, you have to accept people that use Section 8 or other rent subsidies. But realistically, right now with what's going on with rents, it's probably not going to catch up. And can you explain why that is?
Yeah, so Section 8 has a built-in ceiling of how much they're willing to pay for a rental unit. They take the fair market rent, and then they allow up to the payment to be up to 120% of the fair market rent. But the fair market rent is determined by the government, so it's actually lower than what most units are being rented for right now.
Yeah, when we say fair market rent, and we're talking about from HUD standards, that's significantly lower than what a property may go for in Tucson in the actual true fair market rent. We're showing, for example, I think in Tucson right now, a two-bedroom under Section 8 standards, it has a value of $1,000 a month. And obviously in Tucson, that's not truly the market. But again, going back for a second, the big concept is you have to accept somebody that uses Section 8 to pay their rent. But with rents where they are right now, probably it's not going to change a lot of day-to-day operators in terms of what happens. However, if there's a change in the market, if rents come down and the federal standard goes up a little bit, eventually that will catch up. But in the meantime, they do have to change their policies, right? So what would be a policy they'd have to change?
Yeah, so like any other protected class, source of income is now protected. And so if you've got a policy that in the past we wouldn't have accepted Section 8, you now change that policy to indicate that yes, we will participate in the application process to see if a Section 8 tenant would qualify. And you also have to be aware of people walking in and saying, hey, I want to apply, but I take Section 8, or even just a phone call that says, does the property take Section 8? You've got to be aware that, yes.
The answer is yes.
The answer has changed if you did not take it in the past, and otherwise you can be looking at a discrimination lawsuit.
Yeah, and so if you think about traditional protected classes that we've had here in Arizona, which is race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability, someone would come in and say, oh, I'm disabled, will you rent to me? The answer is, well, of course, as long as you're qualified. And now you have to have that same approach if somebody comes in and says, hey, I use Section 8, will you rent to me? The answer is yes, if you qualify. Now, you may know that you're in a Class 8 property and your rents are $2,400 a month for a one-bedroom, therefore Section 8 numbers aren't going to get there. The rent won't pay that much. But your policy has to be is absolutely, if you qualify, we'll accept you, and if Section 8 can pay what is current market rent. You don't have to drop your rents to accept Section 8. So that's the first two, which is this is here. You have to know, even if the rents aren't keeping up. Number two, you have to change your policies so that there will be testers, right?
Yeah. So, and a tester, if you watch our previous podcast, you've heard about some testers before. But yes, they'll essentially just be doing what's called a drive-by lawsuit. They're going to call and say, hey, let's see if these guys are following the policies. Whether they ever choose to rent with you or not, they could just be fishing for a lawsuit there.
Yeah, so if somebody calls you out of the blue and says, do you accept Section 8? And say, yes, we accept anybody as long as they qualify. And that's the answer. And every single time, and that applies to all the protected classes. And another big thing, number three, we'll call it, that has to be brought up, I give you all credit on this one, you figure it out, is rental assistance. We have millions of dollars still left over from the pandemic in terms of rental assistance that's getting out to residents, which again, I think is a great program if the government's coming in into paying people's rent. But previously, landlords didn't have to participate. Now, however, under the definition of source of income, it specifically covers rental assistance. So all Tucson properties have to start being aware of this, is that they do have to accept the rental assistance. But again, they still have to go through the regular, when is the money coming?
Yeah, so if you're in the process of an eviction, or that someone says, well, I'm applying for rental assistance tomorrow, you don't have to pump the brakes and stop the process necessarily. You would be able to move forward, but just know that participating in the rental assistance application could be akin to participating in the Section 8 application, and you wouldn't want to run afoul of the discrimination there by not doing that.
Yeah, and so all it really requires, and again, we suggest across the board landlords work with rental assistance. There's no reason not to take the money. But that means you have to complete the form when it comes to you, get it back to whatever agency's handling it, and go through the processes. Now, if you're in the eviction, you fill out the form, maybe the money's not going to come for a month. You don't have to wait for the money. You have the legal right to proceed, but you do have to fill out the forms. So those are your kind of the bullet three right off the top. I think it's important that we step back, of course, how we got here. We have a housing supply issue. There's no question about that. Every story you hear is rents are going up. So a lot of a lot of localities are looking to how do we resolve this issue. These kind of things will kind of keep coming up. What we have, though, is that truly it's a housing supply issue. We need cities to be open to building, because if you have more units, rents come down. It makes it easier for everyone, right?
Yeah, supply and demand. We all know that concept, but for some reason, we've got some programs here that are trying to ignore that and come around and find different ways to solve the problem, which in truth it probably won't have the effect that we hope it will.
No, and so I was on a call with City Council, one of their meetings, and they basically said they want to take action, which we all applaud taking action, but it has to be for a purpose. And with Section 8, what people don't realize is how the program works. In a general landlord-tenant relationship, you have two parties to a contract, right? You got the lease. You have the landlord and the tenant. What happens in a Section 8 situation?
So the problem there is now, instead of these two parties being able to contract and negotiate for what they want, you now have a third party stepping in, and it's the government, who's a pretty heavy-handed participant in the program. They can require inspections to the property, and if they're not satisfied with the condition of the property, they can simply stop paying the rent. And the problem with the government being that third party is the landlord doesn't have the ability to kick the government out of the apartment. If the tenant stops paying, you have legal remedies and legal rights, but it makes it more difficult when the government's involved. Yeah,
I mean, it's changing the entire notion of a contract. And personally, we've worked with a lot of programs that do subsidies, that do Section 8, and we support all of that. I just think in those kind of situations, it's generally voluntary. Like a landlord can say, you know what, I like the check coming via ACH every single month. On the first, it's not something I have to worry about, and therefore I'm willing to jump in and participate in Section 8, and I like the program. We'll fill out the forms. We'll go through the inspections. However, when source of income is mandated as a protected class for fair housing, Now all landlords have to do that. They don't have the discretion of whether that they want that triangle relationship. It's just a new game, basically.
Yeah, and it really becomes problematic if there is an issue with Section 8, with the payment coming in. A lot of the benefits that you see, like Mark just discussed, is the consistency of knowing that payment's coming in. But again, if there are any issues, you're working with that third party, and it might not be that easy to recover.
Yeah, and we applaud the City of Tucson. I mean, the City of Tucson has brought people on to change how their program is, because Chris mentioned there's inspections. Well, it used to be that inspections took a long time because a unit has to be inspected before a tenant could move in. Well, in this market right now where there's such a demand, it would be easier to have somebody that's not part of the program that can move in tomorrow, pay their rents, pay their deposits, as opposed to somebody that's part of the program and they have to wait for the city to actually approve the unit. So we know and we recognize and appreciate the city is doing a lot of efforts to make the programs better for landlords. The question, of course, just comes down to whether or not that should be mandated. And so we do know there will be likely challenges. We're not here to opine on that. We're really here to advise clients on what to do. So kind of just stepping back and going over those. Realize Section 8, source of income, anything with rental assistance, all of that is now protected under fair housing. You can't discriminate against somebody based on where their funds are coming from. Change your policies. Be ready for those testers.
Yeah, for sure. And one silver lining is a lot of the managers and information that I'm getting out of Tucson is that the Section 8 program has been more consistent, and payments are coming through better than they have in the past. So hopefully that continues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's where the private industry and the public work together. And I know that we've done that a lot. The AMA has with Section 8 department down in Tucson, but that's working together. And this is a question of, well, obviously that's not. So, and then the final note, of course, is the comment of rental assistance. It appears that source of income does cover that. And so whereas landlords didn't necessarily have to participate before, they do have to do so now. So definitely change your policies. Be careful what's going on. And until next time, why don't you go ahead and like and subscribe? We'd appreciate it. Sounds kind of cheesy on a legal podcast, maybe. But until next time, we'll see you on the Zona Law podcast.
Thanks.